Hurrying to her son's morning performance at school, a milkmaid found an abandoned suitcase on the train. Opening it, she couldn't believe her eyes. "Carl, how could you be a whole half-hour late? You know there won't be another bus to town until evening." Amanda understood that complaining to the driver of their only means of transportation was probably pointless. That's just how he was. At least he hadn't gone on a drinking binge. The pay was meager, and his elderly mother supported him on her pension. The village driver felt he was doing them a favor by providing rides for peanuts. But was it Amanda's fault he was underpaid? After her divorce, she milked other people's cows for a pittance, and she was grateful even for that. They weren't exactly oligarchs around here, but so what? If you take the job, you do it properly. "Listen, Amanda, you should thank me for tinkering with the engine of this old wreck for free. Trust me, soon the bus will give out for good, and you'll never get a new one from the administration. And I know why you're so bitter, snapping at everyone," sneered the burly, mustachioed man. "Well, of course, I'm late for my son's performance. I don't want Mark to think I forgot about him," Amanda sighed. "That's not why. It's because your prince dumped you. The whole village knows Cinderella got kicked out with a boot to the rear. And your Matthew even took the kid, as if you were some drunk bum or a crazy fool," the driver said with a self-satisfied grin. "Carl, enough already, will you? Why rub salt in the wound? Life happens. Not everyone has a mother to pull them out of trouble. Have some decency." "Amanda's got it rough as it is," said Nancy, a fellow passenger who had boarded earlier from the farthest village. "As if I've got it easy. I just stepped into the shop at the last stop, and someone smashed the window. No one would admit who did it. They all say it was some guy who ran off. Can't even find anyone. It's summer now, but what'll we do when it gets cold? You think you'll enjoy riding without a window? And don't even think of getting help from the district center, they're always too busy. What am I supposed to do?" The driver was now entirely focused on the issue of his damaged bus, forgetting Amanda altogether. Don't pay him any mind. Men have this silly solidarity. Even when one of them is clearly in the wrong, it's always the woman's fault. "I'll talk to Carl later, I'm friends with his mother," Nancy said. They had once lived in the same village, but when Amanda's husband threw her out, she returned to her crumbling little house, where she now lived in solitude. Gossipers in the village were all too happy to sneer at her plight. "It's fine, Nancy. I'm used to it. I try to keep my chin up and ignore them," Amanda said, turning away and wiping away a tear in secret. In truth, she was terrible at hiding how much she struggled with her husband's cruelty and separation from her son. But what was the point of complaining? Who would help her? Matthew had connections in the legal world so powerful that no one dared challenge him. The bus reeked of gasoline. It was ancient, possibly as old as Amanda herself. In the district center, they'd said there was no point in getting another bus. After all, on these pothole-riddled roads, even the best vehicles wouldn't last long. And to fix the road again, more money would need to be begged for. Sure, there had been funding once, they'd even laid some asphalt on a short stretch of the road 2 years ago, but that was where it ended, as if the rest of the road didn't need repairs. The report, however, boasted that the entire road had been fully repaired. Amanda had read it in the paper herself. That's just how things worked. Those in power did what they wanted and ignored everyone else. It was the same at every level. If someone managed to rise even slightly, to make something of themselves, they often became arrogant and started making life harder for those weaker than them. It was no surprise that Matthew had turned out that way. The bus jolted so violently over the bumps that it felt like her insides were being churned. Oddly enough, it was almost a relief that someone had smashed the window, at least now there was some air. The windows hadn't opened in years, and Carl hadn't planned on fixing them. Usually, the ride was suffocating, but now there was a breeze. Amanda knew the back seat was the draftiest and the bumpiest, but even though there were better seats, she didn't move. At the next stop, a few elderly women would board, and 2 stops later, a wheelchair user with his mother and Patricia with her brood would likely show up too. Patricia always took her kids to their grandmother in town on Tuesdays. Her husband had once preached about traditional values and demanded a big family, but then decided it wasn't inspiring after all. He hadn't found the joy he'd expected in family life. Patricia's long braid, boundless patience, and the fact that her husband was her first and only love lost their significance quickly. Neither modesty nor beauty could keep him. Now, she made her weekly trek to her mother, a city schoolteacher, enduring lectures and advice. She had filed for child support, but her husband, officially unemployed, claimed he was starting fresh. Meanwhile, her 4 children, aged 4 to 10, were left to live however they could. Amanda didn't take the better seats, they'd be needed for those who had it worse. Her legs were aching, thanks to the battered suitcase at her feet, left behind by someone, probably one of the older ladies now chattering about village gossip up front. Amanda wasn't about to confront them over it. She'd endure, that was the kind of life she had. Who was she to complain when so many others had it just as bad, if not worse? The bus slowly filled up. Amanda exchanged a few words with Patricia and her children, greeted the elderly women boarding, and chatted briefly with George, whose aging mother had been tirelessly lobbying for better prosthetics for him, though he still got by with his outdated wheelchair. The oppressive thought weighed on her, everyone was enduring something, and there seemed no end to it. It made her wonder if she was doomed to the same lonely old age, powerless to persuade Matthew to let Mark live with her. Sure, the local forester, Chris, had offered to solve things the manly way. But Chris was wild and temperamental. Rumor had it he'd spent time in prison, and he'd hinted at his interest in Amanda. She knew what accepting his help would cost her, a lifetime tethered to him. Amanda wasn't that desperate. First, she didn't like Chris, plain and simple. Second, she had no desire to unleash such misfortune on her ex-husband. Most importantly, what kind of life would that create for Mark? A bright boy who loved chess and books deserved better than a stepfather like Chris. No, it was better for him to stay with his father. Matthew might be a scoundrel, but at least he wasn't abusive. Amanda glanced at her watch. It was still an hour and a half to the town. She decided to catch some sleep. After all, late nights were unavoidable when working a low-paying, back-breaking job. Sleep refused to come, replaced instead by a flood of memories. Amanda had grown up with her grandmother and had no memory of her parents. Of course, they had existed once. She knew her father had drowned in a drunken bet, trying to swim across their wide river in autumn. Swept away by the current, he'd lost his bearings and never surfaced. Amanda was only 2 years old then, far too young to remember him. Her grandmother had often told her that her father had once been a kind and talented man, full of promise, with dreams of moving to the city to study medicine. But he traded it all for the bottle. Seasonal work shifts barely kept him afloat, and every bit of money he earned went into his only hobby, drinking to forget. He'd begun drinking after Amanda's mother died during childbirth. Supposedly, he had loved her mother deeply, though Amanda doubted he had ever felt the same for her. At least, her grandmother never touched on the subject. But the neighbors didn't hold back. He didn't want anything to do with you, they told the little girl. Said it would have been better if you died instead of Eileen. Imagine trading a beautiful wife for a squawking little lump. Who knows what that lump would grow into? Grandma, is it true what the neighbors say? An 8-year-old Amanda asked one day, repeating everything she'd heard. Amanda, you're beautiful too. I was beautiful in my youth, and so was your mother, her grandmother replied, avoiding a direct answer. That was when Amanda understood that, even if the neighbors exaggerated, they weren't entirely wrong. Her father truly hadn't wanted her. Her grandmother, Helen, was a wise, composed woman. She seemed ageless, rising above the trivialities of life and the passage of time itself. The entire village respected her, frequently seeking advice from the retired schoolteacher. Helen often mediated disputes, calmed frayed nerves, and offered help to anyone in need. She had a deep knowledge of herbs, a skill she passed down to Amanda. Amanda remembered when their neighbor Martha stayed with them for 2 whole years. Martha had shown up one night, frightened and heavily pregnant. She said her husband had been chasing her with an axe, convinced the baby wasn't his. "You did the right thing coming here. You'll be safer with us," Helen had said. The next day, when Martha tried to leave, Helen stopped her. "He'll burn down your house," Martha protested, terrified. "There's a way to deal with your Nelson." "Don't be so afraid of him," Helen reassured her. She then called on the village constable, her former star pupil, to intervene. Whatever he said to Nelson must have worked because the man forgot about his wife altogether. Later, Martha remarried Nelson, and they lived peacefully, even having another child. Amanda had been only 13 at the time, but often overheard neighbors saying that Helen had helped many in the village. "She protects us," they'd say. "What would we do without her?" Amanda lived under her grandmother's care until she was 16. They weren't wealthy, but they never went hungry. The village loved and supported them, often solving problems before Amanda even had a chance to ask for help. It was like living behind a fortress, with Helen as the unshakable wall. "Soon you'll grow up a little more and move to the city to study." "You're so smart," Helen would say. "No, Grandma. I can't leave you," Amanda would reply, worried about the only family she had. Helen was already well past 80, and sometimes she couldn't get out of bed for days. Though she pretended it was out of laziness, Amanda didn't believe her. Helen had always been active, and for her to suddenly stop meant something was seriously wrong. A year later, when Amanda turned 17, her grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep. Amanda woke to find her still lying there, a serene smile on her face. Amanda's morning began as usual, but this time, her playful words fell into an unbearable silence. "Grandma, the sun's already shining brightly. Still lazing around?" Amanda teased. But her grandmother didn't move. That's when Amanda understood it was over. Her grandmother was gone, and she was now completely alone. A week before her passing, Helen had spoken to Amanda in a serious tone, as if sensing the end was near. "Amanda," she had said, "I've sewn some money into the old mattress. There's enough for the funeral and a little left to get you started. You just need to hold on until you turn 18. Try not to end up in an orphanage. By the time they figure it out, you'll already be an adult. Ask the neighbors to keep quiet about things." "Grandma, what are you talking about? Are you feeling unwell? I've told you so many times to see a doctor." Amanda was distraught. I've had my share of struggles. But I've lived a good life," Helen replied. "Your grandfather visited me in a dream. I was young, wearing my wedding dress, and he called me to join him. You know, I loved him dearly. But we didn't have long together. He was killed by smugglers at the border." It was the first time Helen had ever spoken about her late husband, and her eyes sparkled with the love of a young girl. Amanda finally understood why her grandmother had never remarried. She could have, easily. Helen had been a stunning woman in her youth, tall and statuesque, with a swan-like neck, a graceful dancer's stride, and perfect features framed by wavy, ash-blonde hair. Her luminous gray eyes and strong presence made her unforgettable. Amanda's mother had inherited these traits, as had Amanda herself, though Amanda was shorter by about 10 centimeters. "But Grandma, how will I live without you?" Amanda had asked, tears brimming in her eyes. "The most important thing is not to rush into marriage," Helen had said. "Choosing a husband out of loneliness is the worst mistake. Better to stand on your own 2 feet. Don't settle until you find someone you truly love, someone you want to spend your whole life with. And it must be mutual. Love, respect, they go both ways. You need time to make sure of these things." But Amanda forgot her grandmother's advice. At just 18 and a half, she married Matthew. Matthew had been a young, freckled redhead who had come to the village to visit his elderly aunt, one of Amanda's neighbors. "You live all alone, really?" he'd asked, helping her carry a bucket of water back to the house. "What's it to you?" Amanda had replied curtly. At first, she didn't like him. He seemed cocky and overly forward, traits that didn't sit well with villagers. Perhaps such behavior was normal in the city, but Amanda wouldn't know. She'd barely been to one. "Maybe I want to marry you. I like you. Why are you pushing me away so quickly?" "You've got to get to know someone first," Matthew had said with a grin. "Oh, how generous. Should I be delirious with joy?" Amanda had shot back sarcastically. "Well, a fiery girl who knows her worth." "My aunt was right about you, said you send everyone packing," Matthew remarked, visibly disheartened. Amanda suddenly felt a twinge of pity for him. "I'll only marry someone I truly love," she sighed. "Maybe that's me," Matthew said with a teasing grin. "Get out of here." Amanda laughed and splashed him with the cold well water. Instead of getting upset, Matthew seemed delighted. From that moment on, his arrogance disappeared. He started showing up by the gate, asking her to come outside, talking with her about life, and listening to her hopes and dreams. "What's there to think about?" Amanda told him once. "I'll live here, keep working as a milkmaid, get married someday, and have children." "And what's the purpose of that? You're just going to scrape by?" Matthew pressed. "You know, you can be a good, kind person wherever you are." "That's the only meaning my life needs," Amanda replied. She truly didn't dream of the stars. She wanted to work hard, love deeply, and become a good wife and mother, eventually growing old as a cherished grandmother. Life was simple and beautiful in her eyes. Why complicate it? "I'm going to be a great man," Matthew declared. "I'll make a lot of money. My stepfather's a lawyer. My mom married him because she wanted someone successful. I grew up in a shack, like you, but now we have a nice house with running water and heating. I lied to my stepfather, told him I've always wanted to be a lawyer. He believed me and paid for my studies. All thanks to my mom, really. She always said she had to secure my future." Matthew shared that his real father had been a good man, but a simple truck driver. When his mother met her current husband, she quickly divorced his dad. "That's a sad story. Sounds like she didn't love him. Don't you feel sorry for him?" Amanda asked. "I used to, a little," Matthew admitted. "But now I understand. You can't live on goodness alone. You need ambition. I'll need to provide for my wife and child one day." Amanda didn't entirely agree with him. Deep down, she felt he didn't really believe what he was saying. He just didn't want to criticize his mother. To Amanda, he seemed like a genuinely good person. Perhaps she was seeing him through rose-colored glasses. When summer ended, Matthew proposed. Amanda promised to think about it. She couldn't say she was in love, not yet. But he was the first person, apart from her grandmother, who truly listened to her, cared for her, and gave her attention. She thought he genuinely loved her. Besides, she felt so lonely, and Matthew's constant calls and presence became an unnoticed but integral part of her days. When he invited her to meet his mother, Amanda agreed. Their home enchanted her. It was warm and cozy. What impressed her most was that Matthew had already prepared a room for the two of them and their future child, even though Amanda wasn't expecting anyone yet. "Amanda, don't search for something better when what you need is right in front of you. Let's just get married. What do you have to look forward to anyway? Staying a milkmaid your whole life? With me, you won't need to work. You can focus on raising our child. My stepdad already gave me a small job with paperwork, and once I finish my studies, I'll be able to provide even more for you," Matthew said as he handed her a ring. "I'm still not sure. We barely know each other," Amanda hesitated. That's when Matthew revealed a darker side of himself. His face flushed with anger, and he jumped in place, shouting, "Are you rejecting me, you poor nobody? What do you think you are? I'll never forgive you for this." Amanda burst into tears and left that very day. She decided it was for the best, even though it hurt. But just a week later, Matthew came back. He was relentless, apologizing profusely, trying to win her back. "Please understand, I love you. I can't imagine my life without you, that's why I got so upset." "Don't be mad," he pleaded. That evening, he suggested they have a small drink to make peace, and by morning, Amanda found herself waking up in the same bed as him. She remembered nothing and was shocked. Matthew claimed she had thrown herself at him. "I'm glad I was your first," he added. Now, she felt there was no choice but to marry him. "I'm not just anybody," she thought. Amanda also felt embarrassed in front of the neighbors. They must have seen that Matthew spent the night at her house. That's how Matthew got what he wanted. They married, and for the first year, their life was almost happy. Sure, Matthew wasn't the most generous, and Amanda had to economize on everything. But she was used to that, having never lived a life of luxury. His constant criticisms, though, how she didn't cook something right or didn't smile wide enough, started to wear on her. Still, she clung to the hope that things would change once their baby arrived. When Mark was born, life did change, but not for the better. Matthew began disappearing at night. He made no secret of the fact that he wasn't planning to stay faithful. "What do you want from me?" he'd say. "You live in my house, everything's provided for, you don't even need to work. We have a son now. I'm not going to spend all my time staring at your sour face. I'm bored, I need variety. All men are like this, it's not just me. Everyone else deals with it." "Exactly," his mother chimed in. "Your Matthew doesn't drink or hit you. What more do you want?" The only bright spot in Amanda's life was her baby boy. Mark resembled his father, freckles and all, but he inherited Amanda's kind and forgiving nature. He was also remarkably smart for his age, and Amanda couldn't stop marveling at him. During family arguments, Amanda sometimes considered leaving her husband. She had her grandmother's old house, after all. But life there would be much harder for her son, no plumbing, no repairs, and a much more modest lifestyle. Besides, while Matthew was a poor husband, he wasn't a bad father. He loved Mark, spent time with him, and was even proud of him. If not for the argument that followed, Amanda might never have left. She might have endured it all for the rest of her life. But everything changed unexpectedly. It started with her mother-in-law saying, "Matthew asked you to come to his office party. He said to dress properly, he's celebrating a promotion tonight," Ashley said firmly. "Wait a minute, Ashley, why didn't he tell me himself? I barely have any formal clothes." "We hardly ever go anywhere," Amanda replied, flustered. "You have a whole 3 hours. I'll stay with Mark, and you'll manage," Ashley said curtly. "But I don't have money for a dress or shoes." "My budget is only for food," Amanda said, disheartened. "Figure it out yourself. That's not my concern. My son asked, and I passed on the message. You should focus on maintaining good relations instead of sulking." "Then you'll hear about things in advance," Ashley retorted coldly. "Maybe I just won't go at all." "He couldn't even bother to invite me personally or give me money to prepare," Amanda said, hurt. "I wouldn't recommend that. My son won't forgive such a slight. He's already said he can barely tolerate your behavior." "Do as you please," Ashley responded icily. "What behavior? I'm the one putting up with his infidelity and indifference." Amanda burst out. Ashley slammed the door in response, cutting the conversation short. This wasn't unusual. Ashley had always treated Amanda as an unworthy outsider, and she didn't bother hiding her disdain. That evening, Amanda, against her better judgment, managed to borrow a dress from a friend who sometimes worked as a wedding host. The dress was garish, bright ultramarine with sparkles, and didn't suit her at all. But Amanda decided it wasn't worth angering her husband. She'd learned that even the smallest mistake would provoke long, spiteful retaliation. Matthew was also deeply paranoid and quick to jump to conclusions. Armed with the address Ashley had given her, Amanda arrived at the venue. A man, clearly drunk, laughed and said, "Oh, they ordered another one. "This one's mine," and tried to embrace her. Amanda slapped him hard and stormed off to find her husband. She found Matthew, completely intoxicated, draped over a group of women of questionable reputation. One of them was the woman the drunk man had mistaken Amanda for. It turned out there was no corporate party, no promotion, and Matthew hadn't invited Amanda at all. Ashley had lied, using the opportunity to create a rift between them because she was tired of her daughter-in-law. When Amanda confronted Matthew, he erupted in a furious rage. He was convinced she had come to spy on him. No matter how much Amanda explained that it was his mother who sent her, he refused to believe her. "You're lying, plain and simple," he sneered. He didn't even give her money for a taxi, so she barely caught the last bus home. When she returned, Amanda took Mark and left for her grandmother's old house without a word to Ashley. There was no point confronting her. It was clear Ashley despised her enough to orchestrate such a cruel setup. The next day, Matthew showed up at the old house, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "What? Found someone better, so you ran off?" he shouted. "Don't compare me to your mother." Amanda snapped. She knew she shouldn't have said it, but she was too furious to hold back. Matthew, still reeling from his hangover, lunged at Amanda with fists raised, screaming obscenities and vile threats. He promised to make her life unbearable, to crush her spirit. Then, ignoring her desperate attempts to stop him, he grabbed their crying son, shoved him into his car, and drove off. Amanda, powerless against his strength, was left in the dust, shaken and heartbroken. At first, she hoped for reconciliation or at least a chance to raise Mark alone. But Matthew made his position clear. "You think I'm stupid? You want fat alimony checks to live it up? Not a chance. Mom and I will raise Mark just fine without you." Amanda fought back, enduring the humiliation of courtrooms and Matthew's constant manipulation. She went through every legal avenue to secure even the smallest chance of seeing her son. Her life became an exhausting cycle of battles, each one more painful than the last. Now, as Amanda rushed to Mark's school recital, she was already late. She knew Matthew would seize on this to further his narrative that she was an unfit mother. Every missed moment became a weapon for him to wield, a new reason to tell Mark his mother didn't truly care. So far, Mark didn't believe him. He saw her struggles for what they were, evidence of poverty, not indifference. But Amanda knew she couldn't afford to slip up even once. "Hey, did you fall asleep or what?" the bus driver barked, jolting her from her thoughts. No, I'm getting off now," Amanda stammered. She tried to rise but tripped over a battered suitcase sitting in the aisle. "Don't forget your pathetic luggage," the driver added. "It's not mine. Someone must have left it behind. Maybe it has something valuable inside. How about I leave it with you? You can turn it into the police or wherever lost items go," Amanda suggested. "Not my problem, lady. You deal with it." "I don't get paid for this nonsense," Carl snapped, hauling the suitcase off the bus before she could respond. Amanda sighed and followed him out. She eyed the suitcase skeptically. It was old, scuffed, and clearly had seen better days. After a moment's hesitation, she decided to take it with her. Maybe if she opened it later, she'd find a clue to its owner. It felt wrong to abandon it, but for now, she had no choice but to lug it along. At the school, the cloakroom attendant raised an eyebrow at her unusual baggage. "Seriously? Showing up halfway through and dragging this thing around? What, are we running a train station now?" he grumbled. "Can you hold on to it?" "I promise it's nothing dangerous," Amanda pleaded. The man gave her a dubious look before reluctantly agreeing. "Fine, but don't blame me if it gets lost." Amanda nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure of her own words. Quietly, she slipped into the auditorium, finding a seat at the very back. From there, she could barely see the stage. But she had a perfect view of Matthew and his new flame, Rose, a striking blonde in an attention-grabbing red dress, as if no other colors existed. Matthew and Rose clapped loudly for Mark, who was performing in the school play. When Mark waved cheerfully at his father, Amanda's heart sank. The boy's eyes scanned the room with a flicker of hope, but he didn't spot her. She stood and clapped as loudly as she could, but her seat in the shadowy corner was poorly lit, rendering her invisible. How did I become a weekend mom? Amanda thought bitterly, tears welling up in her eyes. Amanda knew she shouldn't cry, or else her mascara would smudge and she'd look ridiculous, but she couldn't hold back the tears. She knew Rose well. Ashley had pointed out to her son that Rose was the daughter of a very influential man. Though Rose was older than Matthew and had bad habits and a terrible personality, no one seemed to care. She had her own cottage and her father was a powerful official. Matthew had forgotten that it was Amanda who had helped him build his business 10 years ago, watching over the farm, staying there all the time, doing most of the work herself. Her husband had promised her she wouldn't have to work, but in the end, Amanda became free labor. And then came Rose. You couldn't blame her, if not one woman, then another. The family had stepped on Amanda to get ahead, and it was easy for them to walk over her. What did they owe her? She had given birth to their son, helped build the business, run the household, and even signed everything over to Matthew. And then, just like that, she was discarded. Matthew told her, "You wouldn't have done anything on your own. It's my success that the business is thriving. And besides, everything will go to our son in the end. What's bothering you?" Amanda paused, thinking. What's bothering me? Maybe it's that you used me and threw me away. Or that you took my son away. Or maybe it's the way you continue to make life difficult for me, bad-mouthing me to Mark and humiliating me. She didn't want to have a meltdown. It never made sense, but every time they talked, it ended up like this. And Matthew seemed to enjoy seeing her helpless. So what now? What are you going to do? Don't make things harder for me, or it'll get worse. You might never see your son again, he always threatened. His mistress knew exactly how he had treated Amanda, and she fully supported his approach, even thinking it was pragmatic. She believed that Amanda didn't need the money. What was she going to do with it anyway? And how could a country bumpkin raise her son properly? No, I'm not going to argue with him this time. I won't give him the satisfaction, Amanda thought to herself. The host invited the parents to come up on stage to congratulate their children. Struggling through the rows from her seat in the back, Amanda made her way to the stage. Despite the disdainful glares from Matthew and his mistress, she hugged her son tightly. She hadn't seen the entire performance, but she said, "You looked amazing, I'm so proud of you. Mom, I'm so glad you came." "I couldn't see you in the audience," Mark said. "I was just sitting a little further back, but it doesn't matter," Amanda replied. She was even relieved that no one seemed to notice her being late. At least her ex wouldn't have the chance to make snide comments again. They went to the school cafeteria together. Mark told her that everything was fine, but the one thing bothering him was that his dad planned to marry Rose. He didn't like her. "Mom, do you think you and Dad could get back together?" Mark asked. "Son, you're almost 12 now, you're growing up, and you need to understand that your dad and I have serious disagreements. Of course, I'll do everything I can to see you more often or even take you, but I'm just a dairy worker. Your dad has strong connections. Doesn't he hurt you?" Amanda asked. "No. Lately, he hasn't been paying much attention to me at all, always spends time with Rose. And Grandma says that thanks to her, our family is rising higher. I don't want a family without you, I love you," said Mark. "You know what? We'll figure something out," Amanda said, even though she hardly believed what she was saying. What she feared most was that Mark would absorb his father's and grandmother's cynical views and come to despise her. Fortunately, that hadn't happened yet. But her son was right, it was time to figure something out. But what? She had no idea, and it left her feeling miserable. Since the bus to the village was only in the evening, Amanda decided to return by train. While waiting for her train in the park, she decided to finally take a look at the mysterious suitcase she had been lugging around all day, which she now regretted. The lock opened quite easily, and at the bottom of the suitcase, Amanda found devices of an unclear purpose, along with some papers, possibly instructions or something like that. She examined them carefully, but there was no indication of ownership, just an instruction manual for a medical device printed on several sheets. And there were also blueprints that Amanda could barely understand, other than noticing that someone had drawn them by hand. It seemed they were related to the mysterious device in the suitcase. While she was thoughtfully looking at the contents and wondering what to do next, she heard a voice nearby. "Wow, I'd love to have something like that. How many lives could have been saved, but my time is up, alas." Amanda looked up and saw a hunched elderly man. He was with a boy, about 10 years old, who was also looking at the contents of the suitcase with interest. "Do you know what this is?" Amanda asked. "Of course, it's a very valuable invention for surgeons. I've never seen anything like it up close, but I've heard of an inventor who managed to create something like this. My name is Edwin, and this is my grandson Thomas." The elderly man explained that he had worked as a surgeon in his youth, which was why he stopped to look at such a marvel. "I found this suitcase completely by accident." Amanda shared the story from earlier in the morning, explaining that she didn't understand any of it. "I'm just a dairy worker, that's how it happened. You did the right thing by not throwing the suitcase away. You know, we could try to find the owner." "This is probably the person who invented the device," said Edwin. "So, will you help me find him?" Amanda asked, hopeful. "Well, we live nearby. Come by for tea, and we can think about it together," the elderly man suggested. There were still a couple of hours until the train, so Amanda accepted the offer. While they drank tea, Edwin called all his colleagues and acquaintances who might know something. In the end, the pensioner managed to find out that the device had been developed by a doctor, but finding him was impossible. This Joel had been fired for stealing medicine, and no one had seen him since. They thought he had either drunk himself to death or was dead. "This is strange, I remember this doctor. He came to our department as an intern, just when I was working my last year before retirement. Chris didn't strike me as the type of person who would do anything bad," Edwin said. "Maybe someone framed him? It happens sometimes with talented people. Unfortunately, in the medical world, like in any other, there are a lot of jealous people. Can I leave the suitcase with you? Won't Thomas's parents mind?" Amanda asked. "The boy has no parents. His mother died during surgery. She was a good friend of mine and asked me to take care of him. So, he's not really my grandson, I'm just his guardian. I used my connections, and I'm trying to live as long as I can so that Thomas doesn't end up in an orphanage," Edwin whispered, so the boy wouldn't hear. "So, if you're not afraid I'll die, leave it with me." "Thank you so much," Amanda said. "Would you adopt the boy if I resolved your financial issues?" The doctor suddenly asked. "Oh, that's a very complicated question. I can't even fight for my own son right now, but if somehow it worked out, I could consider it," Amanda replied. "Well, I can see you're an honest person. Let's exchange numbers, and I'll let you know when there's any news," Edwin said. Amanda felt a sense of relief when she left for the train, no longer burdened by the suitcase. The suitcase had been quite heavy, and its wheels had long since broken, so she was simply tired from carrying it around. The next day, as usual, Amanda went out early for the milking. The labeled buckets were already waiting for her, and she knew which cow belonged to which neighbor, making sure that only the milk from each owner's cow went into their respective bucket. Yes, they paid her little, but they trusted her, and she wasn't going to lose this job. Even that small money was crucial right now. "Amanda, I need to talk to you, and it's not a pleasant conversation," said Beatrice, the owner of 2 cows, an elderly woman whom Amanda had known since childhood. "What happened?" Amanda looked at the angry expression on her neighbor's face with surprise. She had never seen her look at her like that before. "I hear you've been stealing milk. I understand things are tough for you, but that's not right," Beatrice muttered. "What? Who said that?" Amanda struggled to find out that the rumors had been spread by Matthew's aunt. It became clear where this was coming from. Her ex-husband had decided to finally crush her and take away her last source of income. No wonder he hadn't argued with her the day before. He had been satisfied, smirking like a cat that stole cream. But you know my situation. Amanda tried to explain to her neighbor that she wasn't guilty of anything, but Beatrice only sighed, saying she didn't make the decisions and that they would hold a meeting, and then all the cow owners would vote. Amanda didn't want to cry at this ridiculous gathering, but she couldn't help herself. Perhaps it was because of this that no one believed her, and most people, avoiding her gaze, voted to stop using her services. They apologized, but in the end, it was their property, and it had to be taken care of. For several days, Amanda cried. She even thought about calling her ex-husband to tell him everything, but then decided it wasn't worth giving him that pleasure. Amanda, I heard you lost your job. You could come work for me. It's not woman's work, I'll be honest. Your delicate hands will probably not last long. Tanning hides isn't something just any man can do. It takes strength, said Chris, whom Amanda ran into at the store. The man, as always, looked grim and wild. It seemed like he hadn't shaved or cut his hair on purpose. People said he had once had a wife, but she had run off with some city man. Chris wasn't even 40 yet, but he had let himself go badly. I'm not afraid of hard work. Amanda knew that, at least, he wasn't a poacher. He had a license for shooting wolves and foxes, but what bothered her was that Chris had once tried to make a move on her, and it hadn't been that long ago. Let's just make one thing clear, it's just work. I'm not looking for marriage or anything like that. It probably sounded silly, but Amanda decided to clarify right away. Sure, if I need a woman, you think I won't find one? Chris snapped and added that she could also cook for him, for which he'd even pay her more, though in reasonable limits. Fine, just remember, nothing personal, Amanda repeated again. Chris responded somewhat uncertainly, saying that he didn't have any plans for her, though his eyes were darting around. Amanda would never have gone for this kind of arrangement if she hadn't been so desperate for work. Nothing, I'll just be cautious, and everything will be fine. He hasn't hurt anyone before, well, at least not women, Amanda thought, remembering that Chris occasionally tried to teach men lessons, but she didn't know why. Maybe they deserved it. So, that's how things went. Amanda learned a new trade, but she worked from home to avoid spending too much time with the lonely hunter. She also cooked at home and delivered meals to Chris in his cabin in the woods. She was surprised by how much he ordered. Was he really eating all that alone? Amanda didn't dare to ask directly, but she was concerned that Chris might be dealing with some shady people, and that could cast a shadow over her as well. All right, I guess I'll have to follow him secretly. There's no other way, she thought. So, when Chris came to pick up the food she had prepared, she waited a little while and quietly made her way to the cabin. She could hear voices, one was Chris's, and the other belonged to a stranger. Joel, what are you going to do next? I took you in, took care of you, but, Chris asked in an unexpectedly kind tone, one he had never used with anyone from the village. I don't know yet. I don't even know who picked up my suitcase. Maybe it was those bastards who beat me and left me for dead. It's a shame, the invention was one of a kind. I could have saved many lives, the man, Joel, sighed. Then he started recalling how he had been chased, how he had smashed the bus window and thrown the suitcase inside. There was no other way, as he couldn't run with such a heavy burden. Amanda realized, without a doubt, that fate had brought her to the owner of the suitcase. There could be no mistake. She knocked on the door. Chris, you forgot another pot. She had prepared extra food just in case the hunter accidentally discovered her presence. After all, she couldn't just admit that she had been eavesdropping. Couldn't you just call? Chris growled, but there was nowhere else to go. Chris explained to Amanda what she already knew, that a doctor was living in his house, one who was better off not being talked about for now. And recently, a suitcase with some kind of medical device was found on the bus. Is that yours? Amanda pretended not to have heard anything near the cabin. Where? Where is it? Joel's eyes sparkled. A broad-shouldered, blue-eyed brunette in his mid-30s fixed his gaze on her. Well, I actually found the suitcase, and it's being kept by Edwin right now, Amanda admitted. Chris looked at her suspiciously. It seemed like he had guessed that she hadn't come here by accident, but he said nothing. That Edwin? Truly amazing. Joel thanked her profusely, almost kissing her, but Amanda awkwardly pulled away. Chris clearly didn't like the intense display of emotion. Despite his promise that there would be nothing personal, now and then he hinted that Amanda could marry him and never work again, but she had already been through that. When Matthew offered her that, it was really just code for saying she would work around the clock for free, and even if Chris was more decent, he wasn't her type. What could she do? Amanda immediately called Edwin and told him that Joel had been found. They agreed to visit him in exactly a week. The elderly man was overjoyed. For something like this, I'll recover much faster, Joel said, overjoyed. Chris then offered to drive them himself to avoid any issues. Exactly a week later, they stood at Edwin's door, ringing the bell. After some time, about 10 minutes, they heard someone move around inside. When the door opened, they saw little Thomas. The boy was pale, his eyes swollen from crying. Something's happened to Grandpa, he's lying down and wheezing. The three of them rushed into the room and realized that Edwin had likely suffered a heart attack. We need to call an ambulance, Amanda started dialing the number. I've already called, said Thomas, still crying. Fortunately, the doctors arrived within about 5 minutes. Grandpa, will you be okay? The boy asked, sitting beside Edwin. That was the last thing Thomas said. He fell into shock. He couldn't say anything more, and his legs wouldn't support him. Amanda, something's wrong with the boy. Here's some money for you, I'm giving you paid leave, stay with the kid, I'll keep an eye on your house, Chris offered. Amanda nodded. She wanted to help the boy too, especially since Edwin had clearly trusted her, as he had mentioned before. Several days passed. Amanda told Thomas many times that his grandfather would recover, but the child remained silent, unable to walk. She bathed him, fed him, as though he were a baby. Listen, Thomas, I won't leave you, you won't be alone. When she said that, for the first time, the boy showed interest. He started eating better and even smiled occasionally. Amanda realized she needed to continue this way. She told him how much she loved children, talked about her son, and reassured him that Edwin would definitely get better. About 2 weeks later, Thomas started walking again, and little by little, he began to speak. The first thing he asked was, "Did you really mean it? Or did you just say that so I wouldn't be a bother?" Silly boy, how could I lie about something like that? Amanda hugged the boy and cried. She was afraid that he might never recover. The doctors had said there was nothing they could do, that they just had to wait. They had also suggested sending him to a facility for children with mental health issues, but Amanda would never have agreed to that. It would have broken Thomas completely if he had been surrounded by strangers treating him like he was crazy. In fact, it would have broken any adult. While Edwin was recovering, and Thomas was growing more trusting of Amanda, Joel wasn't sitting idle. He worked on securing a patent for the invention. Fortunately, he succeeded. Within a few months, Joel had become both famous and wealthy. Now, he was helping Amanda, Thomas, and Edwin, who was recovering at home because he didn't want to be separated from his grandson for too long. Maybe we should hire a nurse? Joel suggested. Well, if you're looking to pay someone, I need money, but it seems I'm managing just fine. Amanda explained that she was afraid to leave Thomas with a stranger and a sick grandfather. I hired a detective right away to find out who attacked me. And although Chris asked you not to tell, I think it's unavoidable. Joel hesitated and then revealed that Matthew, Amanda's ex-husband, and his mistress were involved. You see, your husband is connected to the criminal world. Her father has already been jailed, and it was he who was telling people like me about promising individuals, so to speak, family business. But why would he do that? He has a farm, Amanda was surprised. I also found that out for you. I suspected you'd ask. Business on the farm hasn't been going well since your divorce, so he was planning to marry Rose, the daughter of that semi-criminal man. Her future father-in-law decided to test him to see if he was worthy of joining the family. He gave the order to have me taken care of. How awful. Amanda didn't know what to say. But Joel had already thought everything through and suggested that, while her ex-husband was under investigation, she take Thomas to live with him. He offered money for good lawyers. And one more thing, would you consider becoming my wife? No, not what you might be thinking, it's just Edwin is ill, and I want to adopt Thomas. Of course, you wouldn't owe me anything, though I must say, I like you very much, Joel said unexpectedly, blushing. How strange. I also want to help Thomas, he's already like my own, and he's attached to me. And I like you too, but I wouldn't want to rush, Amanda replied. She wasn't sure how to handle all this new information, even if some of it was pleasant. Well, then let's just get married. We'll consider it a fake marriage for the adoption, and if you want more, just invite me on a date. How does that sound? Joel asked. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. Amanda was still trying to process everything. Okay, but your eyes keep wandering, so I'll be waiting, Joel laughed and pulled a ring out of his pocket. How clever he is, he's thought of everything. Amanda almost wanted to get a little angry, but couldn't do anything about the smile that spread across her face. Life started to turn around quickly. Amanda decided to move to the city for good and start fresh. She gave her house to the large family of Patricia, who had found a good job in the village. This wasn't surprising since part of the farm now belonged to Amanda. She decided to fight her ex-husband for part of the assets, as he couldn't pay alimony from prison. How can you do this? Do you even have a conscience? Ashley asked Amanda when she found out that Amanda had married a rich inventor, took her son with her, and was still suing Matthew for his assets. Ashley, isn't it your family's tradition to take from the weak what's lying around? Or have you forgotten how you treated me? Who slandered me before the divorce? Did Matthew ever admit that he actually sent me to that corporate event? You know what? People like you deserve to have everything taken from them. Our family is different. We're of white bones, not some poor peasants. I'm sure my Matthew will get out of prison. This is just a misunderstanding, said the mother-in-law, bitterly. And if I slandered you, you weren't too far off. You went to the forest with Chris, then quickly married some other guy, clearly a bird of the same feather. Nothing will change you. Ashley called her an insulting name. They even did a genetic test, but when Mark turned out to be Matthew's son, the former mother-in-law thought it was just a coincidence. Amanda knew that there was no point in talking to a sick person, but she couldn't hold herself back and spat right in her mother-in-law's face. When the woman raised her hand to hit her, Amanda pushed her back so hard that Ashley almost fell. There you go. Just as I expected. A market woman, a peasant, a poor thing. And jumping from man to man, hissed Ashley, but didn't dare to raise her hand again. Amanda didn't tell Mark or her husband about this conversation. She thought it was her personal issue. It was good that she had finally said everything. She couldn't keep it inside anymore. She was happy that the boys got along well. Mark and Thomas quickly became friends, as if they had always been brothers, and everyone was happy. But one day, her son brought up a strange topic. Mom, can I stop visiting Dad in prison? Mark asked. Of course, what, is someone forcing you? Amanda was surprised and explained that his father was an adult and should be responsible for his own actions. Grandma says I'm a traitor, Mark complained. And what do you think? His mother asked, gently stroking his head. Dad betrayed me first, then you, the boy replied. Only a few months later, after he had started living with his mother again, Mark confessed that he had to endure a lot of humiliation from both his grandmother and his father. He was called the stupid son of a milkmaid, and at every opportunity, they would say, Well, it's clear, with such terrible genes, don't expect anything good to come of him. Moreover, he was almost always alone. Neither his father nor his grandmother had time for him, and Rose even promised to send him to an orphanage when she married his father. His dad heard, but didn't object. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Amanda asked. "Dad said it would be even worse for you then. I was protecting you." Mark cried. "You're my hero." Amanda hugged her son and remained silent for a long time. She thought about how lucky she was with her children and husband, even though the path to happiness had not been a quick one. "I'm glad you chose Joel. I like him, and Thomas too, and Grandpa Edwin," Mark said. Everything with Joel had progressed so quickly. From the first moment she saw him in the cabin, pale and exhausted, she somehow knew that they would be together. But talking about it felt inappropriate. For a while, Amanda even thought that she was just going crazy from the hard life, that she had become a daydreamer, making things up in her head. She had longed for love the way a hungry person dreams of bread, and in that longing, it was no surprise to have such a vision. No, it wasn't about anything physical. She simply wanted to come home to a place where she was welcomed. She wanted to be expected like a pie out of the oven, not greeted with a stone in hand. She wanted a safe space at home where everyone loved each other, trusted, and were happy. That's all she had ever needed. Amanda was very afraid that she had been wrong again, that she had just imagined everything, but this time it was real. Her husband had earned her trust step by step, and she hadn't even noticed how she had fallen in love with Joel, completely and irrevocably. When he confessed that he had loved her from the very first second, she immediately believed him. It had happened to her in the same way. Joel was now working at a private clinic, and Edwin, who missed working, had become a consultant there. He often visited Amanda and Joel, slyly asking, "So, when will the third one come?" Amanda blushed and became embarrassed. "Oh, Edwin, what third? Why do you think it will be a boy?" "Aha, so you slipped up. I was waiting for you to stop pretending your marriage was fake. I have a good eye, and you two really suit each other," the elderly man said, pleased with himself. And he was right. A year later, another boy was indeed born into the family. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.